Part 1. Have you ever knelt in prayer and felt like your words were disappearing into emptiness? Like God had turned his face away and left you alone in the silence? I know that feeling. I lived in it until I made one decision that tore open the heavens and changed everything. For 21 mornings, I prayed the same prayer. And on the other side of those 3 weeks, I was not the same person. God showed up. And when he did, he didn't just answer my prayers. He transformed my entire existence. Let me take you back to where this journey began. I was standing in the wreckage of my own life, surrounded by questions I couldn't answer and burdens I couldn't carry. Everything looked fine on the outside. I was doing all the right things, saying all the right words, attending all the right places. But inside, there was a void so deep that nothing could fill it. Not success, not people, not even my own prayers. I had become a professional at going through the motions, while my soul was starving for something real. It was on one of those sleepless nights, when the weight of everything became too much, that I heard the whisper. Not an audible voice, but something that rang clearer than any sound my ears had ever heard. Deep in my spirit, God spoke. He said, meet me every morning. 21 days. Come empty, come broken, come honest. I will meet you there. In that moment, something shifted. I didn't see visions. I didn't hear angels. But I knew with absolute certainty that God was inviting me into something that would cost me everything and give me even more. So I made a covenant. For 21 consecutive mornings, before the sun rose and before the world began its noise, I would kneel before the throne of grace. Not with a religious checklist, not with impressive words, but with a heart laid bare and hands lifted empty. I committed to pray one prayer, simple and raw, born from the deepest place of my need. Father, let me see you. Let me know you. Let me hear you. Break whatever in me needs breaking. Build whatever you desire to build. I surrender all of it, my plans, my timeline, my understanding. Have your complete way in my life. The first morning was harder than I expected. When I knelt in that pre-dawn darkness, the silence felt suffocating. My mind raced with distractions. My body resisted the stillness. I realized how much noise I had been using to drown out the voice of God. How much activity I had substituted for intimacy. How much religion I had built while avoiding true relationship. But I stayed. I opened my mouth and began to pray. And what came out surprised me. Tears. Deep soul, wrenching tears. I wept because I suddenly saw how far I had drifted while convincing myself I was close. How much I had been carrying alone while claiming I trusted God. How little I had truly surrendered while speaking the language of faith. Day 2 arrived and I returned to that place. Then day 3, something began to happen that I wasn't expecting. God wasn't rushing to change my circumstances. He was meticulously, carefully, lovingly changing me. He started peeling back layers I didn't know existed. Pride I had dressed up as confidence. Fear I had disguised as wisdom. Control I had called responsibility. In those early mornings, God held up a mirror to my soul, and what I saw was both devastating and liberating. I was not who I thought I was, but I could become who He created me to be. By day 7, I was exhausted in a way I had never experienced. Not physically tired, but spiritually spent. It was the kind of weariness that comes from wrestling with truth. from letting God excavate the hidden corners of your heart, from releasing things you've gripped so tightly that your hands have gone numb. I remember that seventh morning so clearly. I knelt down with nothing left to say. No eloquent words, no theological framework. Just, God, I don't even know how to pray anymore. I just know I desperately need you. And in that moment of complete emptiness, I felt a fullness I cannot describe, a peace that made no logical sense. The presence of God, thick and tangible, filling the room and filling me. The prayer never changed. Every single morning, the same words. But the depth changed. What started as a cry of desperation slowly transformed into a song of communion. I was no longer just speaking to God. I was learning to be with God, to sit in His presence without agenda, to listen more than I talked, to wait more than I demanded. And in that sacred rhythm, my relationship with my Father began to shift from transactional to transformational. Part 2, around day 10, I woke with a strange sensation. Something had shifted inside me, though everything around me remained exactly the same. The bills were still unpaid. The broken relationship was still fractured. The unanswered questions were still hanging in the air. But I was carrying it all differently. The weight hadn't disappeared, but my shoulders had grown stronger. More than that, I had finally, truly given it to God. Not the superficial surrender we speak about in prayers, but the kind of release that only comes when you stop trying to take back what you've placed in His hands. That morning, as I prayed those familiar words, God spoke again. His voice came like a gentle thunder in my spirit. You've been asking me to change your situation, but I've been changing you so you can carry what I'm about to release. The breakthrough you're praying for requires a different version of you, a surrendered you, a trusting you, a transformed you. Those words shattered something in me. I realized I had been so focused on the destination that I had missed the journey. So obsessed with the miracle that I had overlooked the process of becoming someone who could steward the miracle. I began to understand that these 21 days were never about convincing God to move. God doesn't need convincing. He's already willing, already able, already working in ways we cannot see. This journey was about positioning, about alignment, about creating space in my cluttered life for His manifest presence. I had spent years asking God for things while keeping Him at a safe distance, wanting His blessings, but resisting His intimacy, craving His power, but avoiding His lordship. But intimacy with God changes everything, because when you truly know His heart, you begin to trust His hands, even when you cannot trace His ways. Days 11 through 15 became something I can only describe as holy ground. The discipline had transformed into hunger. I wasn't dragging myself out of bed anymore. I was waking with anticipation, with longing, with expectation. What would God reveal today? What truth would He unveil? What part of me would He heal? And beloved, He was faithful every single morning. Sometimes He corrected me with words that cut deep, but healed deeper. Sometimes He comforted me with a peace that went beyond human understanding. And sometimes He was simply silent, but His silence spoke louder than any sermon I had ever heard. During those middle days, God began showing me patterns in my life I had never noticed. Ways I had been sabotaging my own prayers with doubt disguised as realism. Ways I had been limiting God's power with my small human calculations. Ways I had been approaching Him like a cosmic vending machine instead of a Father who desires relationship more than ritual. He revealed how much of my prayer life had been me making suggestions to God instead of seeking His will. How much of my faith had been negotiation instead of surrender. God, if you do this, then I'll do that. But that's not faith. That's bargaining. And you cannot negotiate with the sovereign King who holds the universe in His hands. By day 16, something remarkable happened. People around me started noticing a change. I hadn't told anyone about my 21-day journey. This was between me and God alone. But they could see something different. A peace that didn't match my circumstances. A joy that wasn't dependent on my situation. A confidence that wasn't rooted in arrogance, but in the unshakable knowledge of who God is. Someone pulled me aside and said, "You seem different, like you've discovered something the rest of us are missing." And in that moment, I realized they were right. I had discovered something. Not a formula or a method, but a person. I had encountered the living God in a way that marked my soul forever. The prayer remained unchanged. "Father, let me see you. Let me know you. Let me hear you. Break what needs breaking. Build what needs building. I surrender." But though the words stayed the same, everything else had changed. What began as desperate pleading had become intimate conversation. What started as my cry for help had become my love language with the Father. I wasn't just talking at God anymore. I was communing with Him, listening, waiting, learning the sacred art of being still in the presence of the Most High. Then came day 17. This was the day the natural realm began to reflect what God had already done in the spiritual realm. I received a phone call I had been waiting months for. A door that seemed permanently closed suddenly swung wide open. Provision came from a direction I never expected. And here's what amazed me most. I wasn't shocked. Not because I had presumed upon God or manufactured my own faith, but because I had come to know His character so intimately over those 17 mornings that I knew He was working all things together. I knew His timing is always perfect, even when it conflicts with mine. I knew He hadn't forgotten me, abandoned me, or ignored my prayers. But beloved, listen carefully to what I'm about to say. The miracle wasn't just in the phone call. The breakthrough wasn't just in the open door. The real transformation was in who I had become. I could now receive the blessing with gratitude instead of anxiety, with worship instead of the fear of losing it, with confidence in God's goodness instead of waiting for the other shoe to drop. The external breakthrough was wonderful, but the internal breakthrough was eternal. God hadn't just changed my circumstances. He had changed me. And a changed person can carry what an unchanged person would destroy. Part 3, days 18, 19, and 20 felt like standing on the edge of eternity. Every morning when I knelt, the atmosphere was charged with something I can only call the glory of God. Heaven felt so close I could almost touch it. Tears flowed freely, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. How had I lived so much of my life with so little of this? How had I settled for knowing about God when I could know God Himself? On day 19, God spoke something that will echo in my soul for the rest of my days. He said, "My child, you came seeking answers, but I was drawing you into relationship. Answers come and go. Circumstances shift. Seasons change. But if you have me, you have everything. And when you have me, everything you truly need will follow in its time. I wept at those words because I realized the profound truth hidden in them. I had been chasing solutions when God was offering himself. And he is the solution, not just to one problem, but to every emptiness, every longing, every ache the human heart can experience. Something else remarkable happened during those 21 days. Relationships that had been broken for years began to heal. Not because I manipulated them or forced reconciliation, but because the work God did in my heart changed how I saw people. The bitterness I had been nursing was washed away. The unforgiveness I didn't even realize I was carrying dissolved in the light of God's grace. I could now love people who had hurt me. I could bless those who had cursed me. I could release those who owed me debts they could never repay. Because I had encountered the God who forgave me an unpayable debt. And that encounter had made me merciful. My entire perspective on trials shifted. Things that used to devastate me became opportunities to witness God's faithfulness. Challenges that made me question his goodness now became platforms to display his character. I'm not saying I became perfect or never struggled again, but something fundamental had changed. The foundation of my faith was no longer built on favorable circumstances. It was anchored in the unchanging nature of God. And that foundation cannot be shaken by storms, seasons, or setbacks. On day 20, I felt both joy and a strange sadness. Joy because of the transformation God had wrought in me. Sadness because I didn't want these sacred mornings to end. I had fallen in love with this rhythm of meeting God before meeting the world. And then, as if reading my heart, God whispered, "Who said this has to end? I'm here every morning, waiting. This isn't a program you complete and move on from. This is relationship. And relationship doesn't have an expiration date." That's when everything clicked into place. This 21-day journey wasn't a spiritual sprint to check off my list. It was the establishment of a lifestyle, a pattern, a way of being. God wasn't inviting me to an event. He was inviting me into a life of daily intimacy, daily surrender, daily encounter with him. The 21 days were just the foundation, just the beginning of something that would continue for the rest of my life. Day 21 arrived. I remember waking before my alarm, my heart already awake and eager. 21 days earlier, I had been desperate, broken, running on empty. Now I was whole, not because every problem had been solved, but because I had found the one who is the answer to every problem. Not because my life was perfect, but because I had encountered the perfect one who walks with me through imperfection. I knelt for that final morning of my commitment and prayed that prayer one more time, but I added something. God, I'm not stopping here.